Welcome to the Medical Manners Podcast, where I give healthcare providers simple tips for ways they can transform the way they connect with their patients and colleagues. Connecting with patients isn't some secret sauce that some of us have and others don't. They're just skills, implemented consistently over time. If you want to transform your medical practice, you're in the right place. I'm Katie Wyatt, your host. This episode is sponsored by the Connect Better audio course. This course is for healthcare providers who want to drastically improve their patient satisfaction or press Gini scores. Each week for 6 weeks, you will listen to a 5 to 10 minute audio training. Then throughout the week, your job is to implement the skills you're taught in every patient encounter. You'll be amazed at how much your score can improve in such a short amount of time. Go to medicalmanners.com and use the code PODCAST for 10% off the course. I have got Dan Linford on the podcast with us today. Dan is a good friend and mentor of mine. Dan, you were my student body officer advisor when I was a senior in high school. And it's funny, as I was preparing to hop on here today, I told my kids, I cannot be late because Dan taught me. My kids know, I say to them all the time, early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. I say that all the time. And I said, I'm interviewing the guy who taught me that. So I've got to be on there on time. And so Dan's always someone that I've looked up to a lot. But I started thinking of you, Dan, as I had a couple experiences with patients. And maybe I'll give just a quick summary of those two experiences. As I was working a telehealth shift, I had a patient connect in with me who needed help getting off of recreational drugs. And this patient had been with another provider and it had not gone well. And she called me really frustrated and kind of she knew that I couldn't do that. She kind of needed some guidance on where she should go. And she said to me, Katie, that provider I was seeing before treated me like a drug addict. And she said, and that's funny because I was a drug addict. So that was a legitimate thing. But she said, I was really hoping that I could find someone that would see potential in me, that would believe that I could be more than a drug addict. And she said, that's who I've got to find, because if everyone I see just sees me as a drug addict and they don't believe in me, she said, I don't believe that I can do it. So I need someone to believe that I can do it. And I thought that was so profound. And then a couple months later, I was interviewing Charla Kerr, who you know.
Oh, yeah.
She had an experience where her son was playing with gasoline and got burned. Did you hear about this?
No.
He was out playing with gasoline and then used a lighter, and it lit him on fire. He was on fire instantly. And she didn't know. He's like 6. And so she didn't know this was going on. Anyways, she's now in a burn unit. Not now, they're home now. But at the time, she was in a burn unit with her son. And she said, I felt like the crappiest mom on the planet because I didn't know my kid was out. I didn't even know he knew how to use a lighter. I didn't know he was out playing with gasoline and then he'd think to light it. And he felt bad about himself because he was probably old enough to know I shouldn't play with this lighter. So she said, we were just in a position where we both felt like idiots and felt like we had really failed. And a nurse who was caring for them just kept saying what an awesome kid her son was and what a great mom she was. And she said that nurse was talking to us like we were the 2 greatest people on the planet. She just kept talking about how awesome we were. And she said that meant the world to me because I did not feel like an awesome mom at that time. So I got thinking about this topic of managing people up and like seeing the potential in people. And I remembered a time that you said to me something along the lines of, Katie, I try to treat you guys, speaking of the student body officers, as I think you can become, not as you are now. And I've always remembered that. I thought it was really profound. So I reached out to you to make sure I had that topic right. And that's when you told me that you had done your master's thesis on this. So anyways, that's kind of the intro. Tell us more about your master's thesis. How did you come up with that idea for that topic?
I was a rough student. I was not a good student. My leaders and most of my teachers have seen me bring up the slide of my wall, and I have my various degrees on the wall, and in the same frame and matting, I have my 2nd grade report card. And I could have chosen my 3rd or my 4th or my 5th. Anyway, I framed that up there. It actually came from, I used to keep this 2nd grade report card behind my monitor when I was an assistant principal. And even when I was a teacher, but I made it a habit when I was an assistant principal to pull it out and to look at it and to do it frequently. And every time I was about to meet with a student, I would look at that report card and I just hold it. It's just a habit I had, and I'd look at that report card. It was as bad as it can be. And the notes on the back that this teacher wrote to my mother would just make your eyes bleed. It's terrible. And she wasn't wrong. Like your friend who was a drug addict. Like the teacher wasn't wrong. I don't blame my teachers for my behavior. It was bad. I love to focus in on you. I have a slide that I zoom in on this, on the citizenship part of this report card. I mean, my literacy was as bad as it could be for an English teacher, especially, but my citizenship was all threes, and three was as low as you could get. Three meant seldom. And my teacher took a pen and marked in minuses on all the threes.
Oh.
So it was bad. And so I had these experiences, and going into junior high, lots of, tough things. I got in a lot of fights. I was involved in the juvenile justice system. Into junior high, I had luckily an awesome principal, and a school principal, rather than give me the boot again from school, told me when I got kicked out of a shop class, and told me I had to go find a teacher that would let me in, and gave me a list of about 7 teachers that would fill that credit. I had to go find a teacher, and I went to an art teacher, an orchestra teacher, and a few others. I actually ended up working. I was a teacher at the same time that art teacher was a teacher, and we had a conversation about that. You didn't let me in, man. You could have been my story. And it was Mr. Vanderdoes. It was Jerry Vanderdoes who let me into this theater class, and I just can't tell you why he did. I mean, it makes no sense to me. I wasn't his kind of kid necessarily. I wasn't a theater kid or an art kid. In fact, I was more likely to really make fun of those kids and him, frankly. I probably had unkind thoughts about him, and he let me in, and he fairly quickly gave me a sizable part. I was Mayor Shin in the music band, so I was sort of an eccentric, top hat wearing, loudmouth, and I was terrible. I was terrible through all the practices. He would just plead with me to know the part, to put a little something into it, anything. He would show me. He didn't know that I was at home working very hard on this part, but I was just whatever. I was a dopey junior high kid. I was too cool to do it in front of the kids in the play. I never did the part, but at home, I'm telling you, it was pretty amazing. I had it. I was ready to go. Even our double rehearsal Saturday, I just remember him and the assistant director just pleading with me to please just put something into this. We go on Monday night. You've got the weekend. Really just think about these. He'd make me say the lines with him. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I've got it down even better than this. But I never turned it on until opening night. And all of a sudden I remember the girl who played my wife, Mayor Shin's wife, was just flabbergasted, because she was a legitimate actress and a really successful actress, really had success later on. And she's just looking at me like, what is happening here? And then at intermission, Jerry Vanderdoes and Miss Ricketts, the assistant, came both with tears and said, where did this come from? What are you doing? Why have you not been doing it? Did you practice this on Sunday? I'm like, well, I've been doing it all along. I've been practicing all along. I just remember telling him, I'm working at my house, but I just felt dumb doing it in front of my peers. But when the adults were there and I had to do it for real. So, that's a fun story. And that's kind of my origin story as a superintendent of a large school district. That's what got me started, gave me something that I felt I was good at. This guy who just had no reason to see something in me gave me a part, and then continued to give me parts. And then, I still, even as a high school student, I felt like I was too cool for it and quit doing it. I was still trying to figure out who I was, and then ended up getting pulled back into it because of this guy who I just had a relationship with. He's like, well, you need to try out for shows, and you're just wandering here. And anyway, it really did it was a life change for me. And then in high school, I had a creative writing teacher, Jerry Curtis, 2 Jerrys. She was a woman, he was a man. But Jerry Curtis, she had us write. And I was not college bound. No part of me thought college sounded anything but horrible. My parents didn't expect that, want that for me. Great parents, amazing, respect your elders, kind of a disciplined home, but not academic. And so Jerry Curtis always just found a way to compliment my writing. She would post it on the wall. I can see her golden line board in front of me right now. I would stare at my line that she put on that board. And I'm a pretty self-actualized senior, but that meant the world to me. It really did. And that a teacher, out of all the lines in all the class, I'm one of like 5 lines up on this board. That was pretty special to me. And then
Yeah.
she turned in an assignment. She gave us a writing assignment to write about a life-changing experience. Of course, I wrote about Jerry Vanderdoes. She turned it into this magazine, Guidepost Magazine. And so when I talked to my teacher about the scholarship, and I learned that it wasn't just money. I had to use it at a university. I thought, well, I'll never use it. They gave me an electric typewriter with it, which was really cool. But for a kid that didn't want to write anything, it didn't matter much. So anyway, it was a couple years into marriage, actually, that my wife talked me into using it. And I started school. Anyway, that's where I began, as I'm learning and I'm realizing how my life is changing, how my mind is changing, that the value of those 2 teachers that for inexplicably, saw something and were probably had to look pretty hard for it, had to dig. And
Yeah.
they just did a lot of work, a lot of faith work that someone that believes in someone else has to. And I realized that, looking back, I went to Jerry Vanderdoes' retirement a couple of years ago. He moved to Colorado and I went there, and there were 100 men my age and between the ages of 20 and 50 that were all there, they asked me to speak. So I said some words about them. We all have tears right now. I'm like, this
Same
is
story.
The dudes just like me and women that were just absolutely this guy. So it wasn't just me. It wasn't just I secretly did have this amazing theater talent. No, he treated everyone like they had amazing theater talent, and just maybe some of us were dumb enough to believe him, or whatever. But because he was willing to be that guy, and Jerry Curtis is the same. She knew I'd never turn in a story myself, so she did it. And that started with me as a teacher wanting to be the same thing, wanting to always see my students for what they could be. And that translated into meeting when I met with students. And as I got ahead of students and I realized I'm becoming their mentor now, to just continue to stay curious about what a student can become. I hope, especially with my English students that I, taught hundreds and hundreds over those years, I hope they always felt like at the very least that I just truly, purely, and with good evidence believe that they could be really successful and that they could really do anything, and that they're the biggest inhibitions, the only thing truly holding someone back, especially at that age, right? The only thing holding them back is themselves, is the chains in their minds, not real chains.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so I think that in that place, it kind of evolved. And then when I worked in my master's program and I focused on mentoring programs, that became the essence of what I really built around the research that was already available, that all came back to this idea that young people need an adult in their life, especially young people who don't have a positive adult in their life. But, even those that aren't students who struggle or who are underserved also need a positive adult in their life, because, it's a spectrum of potential. And I really tried to operate that way. And then when I put it into practice and trained other teachers, and we launched this mentoring program where we did focus on mostly our underserved students, or students that, I've mentioned this before, but I struggle with the at-risk label, students that are at risk, because we can just say, oh, because of theyese life circumstances, we're going to see you as at risk.
Yeah.
And there's real danger in just labeling someone at risk because they have some of these factors. And anyway, so training staff to do basically this, that when you meet with these young people, they have to know that you believe in them. And we were very committed to, at the very least, even when it was hard, even when these kids did not want to be loved, they didn't see it in themselves, they didn't trust, at the very least, they were suspicious of authority and us telling them things. So it had to be genuine. We couldn't tell them things that we didn't believe ourselves.
Yeah.
But it was interesting for the staff and for those students as we started meeting with what at the time we were calling at-risk students. And, I can't say that across the board it was successful. We were trying to figure it out, but it for all of us, our head football coach was a mentor. There were like 15 faculty mentors that volunteered, and all just people that wanted to be involved and make a difference. no extra pay, just we would run the numbers, and we would keep track of the meetings. And the goal was ultimately to put a positive adult in their life. And sometimes you had to fish. You had to really, it took a while to get to know a student well enough that you could authentically say, you're amazing at this, or this is something I bet you'd love, that you can go to college and you may not see yourself, and you may think college sounds like just more school. But a lot of kids that don't fall in love with high school fall in love with college. And that's just what the doctor ordered. And then some kids were not interested in college. Ultimately, our goal was always college at the time. That was the goal, to get them thinking about college, get them college bound, which meant graduation, which meant other things, getting credits, getting college ready. But ultimately, it was about getting them to believe in themselves.
Yeah. Well, and what I like about this is you had this experience and experiences as a youth, and then that changed your life. You believed in it. And so then you were able to kind of replicate this with those around you. And now you're a superintendent and you replicate this on a massive scale. And so I just think the ripples that this can cause, and like you said, it doesn't work with everyone. But if you live your life this way, you will make a difference, and that ripples out. And so I like the idea of that. I know you and I have talked about the fact that sometimes as healthcare workers, we get calloused because we get patient after patient after patient who doesn't change, who doesn't quit smoking, who doesn't quit drugs, who doesn't do the things that we tell them they need to do to fix the problem they come to us for, right? And so we kind of get like this really calloused approach. And I think if we could file down that callus just a little and remember that there are Dan Linfords in the world who just need someone to believe in them. And that may only be one or two, but that's a life changed. And so I just love the whole idea of your story.
Well, and definitely it's hard to find a person that hasn't been impacted by a nurse, for example. And there's never probably a time in your life. I think I've told you I'm on a hospital board. And so I get to hear, as a layperson, I get to hear, all the numbers and how we're doing and what it looks like. But I get to hear the care that goes on. Those board meetings are always very philosophical and always altruistic, and we're at our best. We're thinking about, because we're just talking about it. And when you're talking about your beliefs, it all comes out. It's something different at whatever 2 a.m. On the night shift, and ornery patients that are treating you like the McDonald's worker that doesn't get their order right, or I think about those folks, and I felt that way. But when you're vulnerable and miserable and scared, like so many people are in a hospital, a worker can just be very effective and be efficient and be really good at their job. And that's probably the most important thing. But where kind of the miracle happens, I think, and probably where you can really extract joy from your work, is in that space where you can make a difference when you don't have to. The nurse that worked with Charlotte, that's a miracle. And that doesn't have to happen. That's an absolute choice. I like that you talk about in your intros. I've listened to your podcast intro, that most of these are skills. You're not just gifted. Now, Katie, you're gifted. You're a special person, and you've always been that person that brings, really. You in high school, when people are kind of guarded and are worried about what everyone thinks, you were a person that brought a lot of sunshine to people. You were vulnerable and self-deprecating and fun, and you could have been a snotty, stuck-up girl, and you chose to be sunshine. So there are people that are gifted with it, and you're a little bit probably like Michael Jordan trying to explain how to be good at basketball, but probably difficult for him to explain what he does. But I think the point is, everyone's going to do it in their own way. Everyone's going to connect with someone in their own way, in a way that really works for them. But if you don't connect with people, if you don't see people as their best selves, it's easy to fall into the trap of seeing probably patients that way, certainly parents and students that way, instead of just seeing their potential. And I can guarantee you're not going to make a miracle happen for them, and you're not going to make a miracle happen for yourself either, if you don't choose to see people for what they could become, what they could be as their best selves. So
Right.
yeah, I really love what you're doing, and I think it's really important. And it's not just our industries; it's every industry.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. My mom, of course, listens to my podcast, right? She's probably one of my most faithful listeners. And she said, she'll call me and say, Katie, I loved your episode, because even though I kind of teach it towards the healthcare side, they really are just skills that you can use in any situation. I just think of how powerful of a parent we would be if we looked at our children and we refused to see them in any way but what they could become. And we just refuse. Like you said, I refuse to see you in any way but that way. It's just a powerful way to live. And honestly, even if they don't change, it's a much happier way to live as a person. So,
Yeah. The patient's there, you're doing it anyway, you're going through the work, you can choose. And I think most of the medical care profession does this. But honestly, you're in this awesome miracle producing position. And so you may as well produce miracles. And it's almost
yeah,
exclusively a matter of attitude, an approach. Doesn't take much
yeah.
more energy.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel the same about you in education. Like, I just think of those educators. You are just in such an amazing position to affect lives. And they do every day.
There's this study, it's a strong study, and ultimately what they did is they had some teachers, and there are these case studies. There are these two particular teachers. They told one teacher that they're going to teach honor students, and they told another teacher that they're going to work with low performing students, and in both cases they just found that students rose to the teacher's expectation. Now, obviously, there's one-offs and there's kids that have sincere learning disabilities, and you're going to have to teach towards their accommodations. But in the aggregate, people will respond to the expectation. They'll respond to your belief in them. I think some of it is the burnout that happens in every career in every industry, because every nurse and every teacher starts for the right reasons. Even if
Yeah.
they think they're going to make the big money and have the great hours or whatever, they get into it because they care about people and they want to take care of people and they want to be someone that makes these little miracles happen for people. And I think so much of it is reminding ourselves that's why we're there, which for me comes from doing the job the right way,
Yeah.
and which caring about people.
Yeah. And I like the idea that even when we're burnt out, because it happens to all of us, but I like the idea that we look in each individual and we kind of try to find their genius. You're the one that taught me this word, but we try to find their genius, maybe just one thing that we're like, this person, this is their thing. They're good at this. And then we just point that out. And it doesn't have to be a huge thing. If I'm in there for 15 or 20 minutes with a patient, that's a lot of time. And so I don't have a lot of time, but if I can just find that one thing that's their genius and just point it out to them, even just that small act can make a huge difference.
It does. And we were talking about the multiplier effect, the Liz Wiseman book. And Liz, she's shot off like a superstar now. I couldn't afford to bring her in to train our leaders, but for good reason, because there's strong science. It's not just country wisdom saying, recognize genius. We're talking about multinational corporations that bring her in because there's real value. And she's studied industries and the leaders that are multipliers that recognize genius and help those people contribute at their highest point of contribution using their genius, recognizing it and applying it, are so much more successful because, for one, the people are so much happier and feel more successful versus what she called diminishers. And that's a pretty negative word, but people that kind of dictate from the top, don't have much faith in people, overmanage people, to oversimplify things. But honestly, in times of war, you probably need some diminishers. There are times, some of the great leaders in history were probably diminishers, and there were probably certain times that you had to be that, but almost nothing in modern times calls for that. It's just sort of self-indulgence to be a diminisher, I think, in today's world. I think we can all be multipliers and we can all build on people's genius. And, I wish I had invented that, but I certainly used it as a leader.
Yeah. Well, and as you're saying this, I have actually never clued into this. I am doing what I'm doing today because an old boss of mine recognized what my genius was and told me that. So I worked at a really busy urgent care, patients in, patients out. And I worked there for 7 years as a nurse practitioner. And one of my old bosses said to me one day, Katie, I have never had a patient complain about you, ever. And he's like, even the really mad ones, they come out of your rooms happy. And so we told the girls at the front desk, and he said, if anyone is at the front desk mad, like they're mad before they even come in, room them with Katie every time. And he's like, Katie will take care of them. And so it kind of got to be a joke. The secretary would call back and be like, I got one for Katie. And I kind of saw this as a challenge. Like, I was like, bring it on. They walk in there mad, they're going to walk out happy. And so that kind of became my task, was to find a way to make it okay with these patients that were tough. And it kind of became like this, oh, my boss thinks I can do it. Like, I better find a way to make it work with this patient. And I don't think I'd be doing what I am today. It's not like I thought I was good at that. I just thought I was doing my thing. But because he pointed that out, I thought, actually I can turn a patient's day around. And so it's interesting. I am doing what I did today because of a multiplier and their actions towards me. Well, Dan, thank you. I know that since I've started thinking about this idea, it's changed the way that I see patients. And so thank you
Oh,
for believing in me back when I was a high schooler, and for being the kind of person that built others up and looked for the good, and it's still having ripple effects in my life. So thanks for being that person. Thanks for taking time to share your knowledge on it.
well, my pleasure. And it is good. We haven't talked for a long time. It doesn't surprise me that you're trying to be value added in your profession and trying to improve it and really being collaborative to try to figure out what's the secret sauce to A, living a happy life and some of those things, but B, helping everyone around us be successful and have a happy life as well. It's just pretty special. Not everybody's willing to operate in this space. And I think the need for it, as I see, I work in an industry that can get pretty cynical about things and feel bad that people have an opinion about everything they do. I have 12,000 employees or so, and I can tell you that this is needed everywhere. It's needed in every industry, top to bottom. Not enough people are going to listen to a podcast about it. So I'm grateful that someone's making one.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, the best way to support what I do is by rating and reviewing the podcast. Your feedback helps me reach more listeners to make an even greater impact. It would also mean the world to me if you would share it with a friend or colleague who you think could benefit from the topics we discuss. Together, we can transform the way we deliver healthcare by transforming the way we connect. Take care.